Whickham past and present. Whickham is a small residential town, combined with village charm, overlooking the River Tyne to the north, with the rivers Derwent to the west and Thames to the east. Until the 1950s, the village remained mainly rural, with coal mining providing much employment. Whickham has some of the finest views overlooking Newcastle, and a location that offers easy access to the wonderful countryside of Northumberland and Durham. Let us now go backwards in time. People have lived in the Whickham area for over 4,000 years. This has been proved by finds of axe heads, flints and ancient pottery. There is also evidence at Marshall Land's farm that there was a Roman fort here. The village used to be called Quickham, as was discovered from old documents from 800 years ago. Quickham, an Anglo-Saxon name, meaning a village with a quickset hedge, was first mentioned in the Bolden Book of 1183. Coal mining was very important in the development of Whickham, and from the early 1300s, coal production dominated the area until the early 1960s. The other main occupation was farming. This is the oldest building in Whickham, the beautiful Church of St. Mary the Virgin. It lies in the centre of this conservation area, where there are many listed buildings. But we will start just beyond the eastern boundary, where the old Turnpike Road, now Whickham Highway, meets the road from Dunstan. In a field at the top of Dunstan Bank, we see that all that remains of the magnificent beech tree, which was seriously damaged by the high winds of January 2005. We now come to Dunstan Hill House. This house was bought in 1704 from the Shaftos by the Carr family. In 1870, Ralph Carr married Hannah Ellison, a wealthy landowner. The family name became Carr-Ellison on the succession to the Ellison estates. Dunstan Hill House remained in the Carr-Ellison family until 1904, when it became the Newcastle Pensions Hospital. This picture shows the east face of Dunstan Hill House, which is now being converted into residential apartments. On then to the stable block and the carriage house. These are also being converted into dwellings, and the rest of the site is being developed for housing. Moving on, we come to the modern Dunstan Hill Hospital. Quite a change from the old wooden walls built to accommodate wounded soldiers in World War I. A little further up the highway is Dunstan West Farm. It was part of the Dunstan Hill estate and was so called because it lies west of Dunstan. Thomas Easy, a gentleman farmer, lived at the farmhouse and was famous for winning 2 races on the same horse on one day at Blaydon Races. It is a Grade II listed building and is now a popular riding school. Located on Whickham Highway opposite the police station is a house called Blackthorn, with 2 rather curious gateposts. These were originally the gateposts of Lang Jack's cottage at Clockburn, Lonnon. The posts were given to the present owner in 1970, and are probably the only remaining part of his cottage. Close by is Pink House, the home of Ganny Willis in the 1920s and 30s. On Sunday evenings she would open up her front room to sell sweets and lemonade to passers-by who made the regular evening stroll after church from the village to the top of Carr's Bank, now Dunstan Bank. Another well-established building of special interest is Beach House. It was originally a boarding school for boys, attended by the First Lord Armstrong and the sons of the Carr-Ellison family, notably Henry Byrne Carr, who was rector of Whickham from 1846 and served for 50 years. Next we come to East Lodge, a small stone-built cottage which has been extensively renovated in recent years. It was originally a gatehouse for the newly built Whickham Hall, now known as Whickham Lodge. The building, an 18th century mansion built by John and Francesca Barras in 1740, was originally set in 19 acres of parkland. John's hobby was brewing ales, and this was done in the cellar of Whickham Hall. It eventually turned into a small business, and local customers who visited to drink at the hall began calling it the Wags. Rather interestingly, the cellar below Whickham Lodge still remains as it was over 250 years ago. The Barras brewing business expanded over the years, eventually opening the Tyne Brewery in Bath Lane, Newcastle. In 1890, the Newcastle Breweries was formed, an amalgamation of 5 brewing companies, including the Barras Brewery. This formed the 5 points of the world-famous logo, the Blue Star. Could it be said the Newcastle Brewery really started in Whickham Lodge all those years ago? In the cellar there is a bricked-up entrance to a tunnel that runs from the lodge to Dockendale Hall with branches to the Bay Horse Inn and on to the rectory. The Barras family were revered as great benefactors of the Whickham community until John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, held a mass meeting at the foot of Broom Lane in 1752, preaching against the evils of alcohol and the brewing of ale. This large property is now divided into separate homes. Now cross the road into Duckpool Lane, which dates back to the 1800s. It was probably named after a pond frequented by ducks from a nearby farm. Further down the lane we come to a row of 19th century cottages. It is here a wagon wain ran, with wains transporting coal which had passed through Whickham Hall estate to the Staithes for shipping out from the Tyne. A little further along Whickham Highway, at the corner of Dockendale Lane, is Toll House. This is reputed to have been one of many toll houses situated along the old Turnpike Road, which ran from Gateshead, up Lobley Hill, through Whickham, down Swalwell Bank and on to Hexham. Dockendale Lane is an interesting area. Here the road reverts to the original cobbles, leading to the rear of Dockendale Hall and the old farm stables. This area is probably the only remaining cobbled road in Whickham. Dockendale Hall is thought to be one of the oldest residential areas in Whickham. Cromwell is reputed to have stayed here for 2 nights in 1648 on his way to Scotland. In 1760, a woman who lived here purchased an old bureau at a sale in the Blacksmith's Arms, Blaydon. She paid 4 shillings and 6pence, that's 22.5 pence in today's currency. Unable to carry the bureau home, she had enlisted help of a local handyman. When she got it home, she discovered a considerable amount of gold hidden in the bureau, and to keep her helper quiet, she gave him £200, which bought him a house and a shop. From the old photographs we can see that the front facade of the hall is unchanged. It is now divided into flats. According to one of the oldest residents of Dockendale Hall, this grand Wellingtonian cedar tree in the front garden dates back to the time the hall was built over 400 years ago. The property was owned by various families until 1948, when it was purchased by the Catholic Church and used as a presbytery. The stables were modified to become St Mary's Roman Catholic Church, and in 1973, when the new church was built, it was converted to the present church hall. Here we enter Whickham Park off Whickham Highway. The site was developed for modern houses many years ago. The original building, formerly known as the Mansion House, in 1865, is still here. It was an early residence of Jasper Harrison, who was a local antiquary of some importance and authority. In 1830 it was the residence of Charles Atwood, who was leader of the local Chartists. He was an ironmaster who set up the first iron foundry at Tow Law. He was also an associate of a well-known character, John English, better known as Lang Jack, but more of him later. The Bay Horse is the only public house in Whickham to keep its original name, and has for many years been a focal point for the villagers of Whickham and its surrounding areas. This photograph, taken in 1905, shows local footballers in fancy dress, ready for a charity football match. Between the Bay Horse and the imposing council offices is a small narrow road known as the Knolls. The first post office was situated here in 1850 before moving to various sites in the village. Today there are several small businesses in operation. The old parochial school, situated in School Lane at the top of the Knolls, dates from the 1700s. It was built as a charity school for 36 poor children of the parish. In 1838, when Jackie Robinson became headmaster, the reputation of the school was greatly enhanced, with pupils travelling from nearby villages. Schoolhouse, built in 1870 for a schoolmistress, was financed by private subscription. This is the first mention of girls attending the school. In 1972, the school moved to larger premises along the Broadway. A little further along School Lane is Park Cottage. This was an entrance for the horse-drawn coaches going to the Mansion House in Whickham Park. The archway, now blocked up, shows the original entrance. The cottage was originally 2 dwellings, which provided accommodation for the head gardener and coachman. The cottage dates back to 1791, but the date shown above the arch is only visible when the ivy has lost its leaves. The council offices were built over 100 years ago in 1904. The building was the centre of local government and served the community for 70 years before being absorbed into Gateshead Metropolitan Borough Council in 1974. Today it still provides a number of local services. On the corner is the War Memorial, dedicated in 1922 to commemorate those lost in World War I. Church Green has had a variety of uses. In 1569, 2 men were executed there, and up to the 1820s it was the site of the village stocks. For a time it was used as a playground for the parochial school. In 1851, a man called Atkins tried to enclose it, but it was compulsory purchased by Rothcar Ellison and donated for use by the people of Whickham in perpetuity. It was also used for the annual village hoppings until the 1930s when, after a week of poor takings, the showmen refused to pay the rent, and as a result were banned from the site permanently. It was subsequently used for parking vehicles. In 1953 the council took it over and landscaped it to a high standard, helping Whickham to win Britain in Bloom several times. Tucked away in the corner of Church Green is the Bakehouse Craft Bakery. This was formerly a coach house used by the Clavering family, attending church services to protect their coach and horses from inclement weather. The Claverings in the 17th century were ardent royalists, and at that time one of the most powerful and influential families in England. According to the 1865 Ordnance Survey map, this road was named Occupation Road. The name Occupation Road was quite commonly used in the north, and were roads marked out for the passage of livestock. It is also interesting to note the name of the main road was Whickham Town Street. Looking over the green, we come back to the Church of St. Mary the Virgin. Parts of the architecture suggest that the church is about 900 years old, starting with the nave and chancel around 1100, through to the early English period, when the north and south aisles were added in about 1200. The tower and the porch were added around 1360. The Great Fire of 1841 destroyed the roof and interior, and the restoration work was completed some 21 years later. The last restoration was a new roof in 2002. The tower houses 6 bells dating back to the 1600s, and here in 2004 the campanologists are still using them. This is their regular practice and training session. The churchyard contains many interesting headstones, the oldest being Ralph and Mary Dalton, dating back to 1602, and that of Robert Pescod, 1609. This headstone to Phoebe Symonds, who was a well-respected teacher running a school for girls. She died in 1859, and to show the appreciation of her work, the public subscribed to a stained glass window in St. Mary's Church. Here we have a memorial to Harry Clasper, who was a world-class oarsman. He was world champion in 1845. He was a boat builder of great renown, inventing the boat outrigger. Rowing was a great cult sport in the Victorian era. In Newcastle, between 50,000 to 60,000 spectators would regularly gather on the banks of the Tyne to watch rowers such as Harry Clasper. He finished life as a pub landlord, running the Tunnel Pub in Tyne Street, Newcastle. Harry died on the 12th of July 1870, aged 58 years. The alehouse is long gone, but the tunnel after which it was named still remains. This is the headstone of Jackie Robinson, who was master of the parochial school. Under his supervision, it became the most famous educational establishment in the area. Jackie possessed great natural shrewdness, individuality and force of character. He died on the 25th of September 1874, aged 74 years. This particular memorial is to William Shield, born in Swalwell in 1748. His house, which was close to the 3 Tuns in Swalwell, formerly stood on the site of the present-day vehicle testing station. William Shield was one of the most popular musicians of his day and was appointed Master of the King's Music in 1817. His most famous claim to fame is that he composed the tune for the song Auld Lang Syne, and of course Robert Burns later penned the words. Shield is buried in Westminster Abbey. He died at the age of 80 on the 25th of January 1829, which uncannily is Burns Night. This flat gravestone is rather interesting. The worn area shows where, in the late 1800s, the parish clerk used to stand to announce to the people leaving church any forthcoming events of importance. The part of the stone where the clerk stood had been considerably worn, and since the cessation of that custom was re-lettered in the 1890s. A narrow alley called Dogloup leads us from Church Green to Church Chair, the oldest part of the village. The building immediately in front of us is the present-day rectory and is probably the oldest residence in Whickham, dating back to pre-Reformation times, and was once known as Whickham Hall. At this site in Church Chair, we see part of an old stone wall, all that remains of the Mason's Arms, which was demolished in the late 1800s. In former times, the local monks probably lived here. In 1921, the parish hall for St Mary's Church was made from a converted coach house situated in Church Chair. It became a picture hall in 1923, and during the general strike of 1926 was used as a temporary soup kitchen. It has had many different uses since, such as a roller skating rink, a bingo club, and currently it is a fitness centre. This building was formerly a tithe barn which stored grain. It later became a coach house for the village, and it is now a tea room. A number of old houses in Church Chair make up the present St Mary's Centre, established in 1923. It was significantly extended in 1978, and the foundation stone was laid by Mrs Pyle, assisted by Bill Ollerman. Mrs Pyle was born in Whickham and lived well into her 90s. She was closely involved with the Mothers' Union in Whickham. The main hall accommodates 200 people, and the premises are the focus for many community activities. The local theatre club makes drama productions twice a year, with a special pantomime for the festive season.
I'm sorry to bother you, sir. There are 3 gentlemen at the door. They say it's a matter of the utmost urgency. They say they're from Father Christmas. Must see you about this year's toy assignment.
Oh, I suppose I'd better see them, although it is most inconvenient.
Thank you, sir. It's very good of you to see us at such short notice. But as personal friends and the sole representatives of Father Christmas, that's the least we could expect.
Oh, think nothing of it. Although I must ask you to be brief, because I am truly very busy. I must get back to work. I don't have to tell you the amount of what I have to get through before Christmas.
Oh, humbug, enough of this nonsense. Tie them up! Then we shall have control of all the toys in the world. Nobody will be able to make any toys or sell them without our permission. We'll be able to charge what we like. We'll be rich, rich, rich beyond our wildest dreams. All these years, you have been giving away toys for nothing. and making all the children of the world happy on Christmas morning. Well, we'll soon put a stop to that.
High Place Cottage is thought to have been the home of the local fireman. The horses were kept in a field off Colway Lane, and evidence of the lean-to stable can be seen on the east side of the lane. These holes show where the roof timbers were fixed, and the recess a little higher up in the lane is what remains of the saddle room. The horse-drawn water pump was housed in Broom Lane. Here can be seen the original access to the pump. In those days the road was much lower. Next to High Place is Forge Cottage, the home and workshop of the village blacksmith. This very attractive stone-built house called Rose Villa stands back from Front Street at the entrance to Church Chair and was the residence of many doctors. Here we see Dr. Smith ready to do his home calls on horseback. The property remained in the Smith family for over 100 years until a new surgery was built in Rectory Lane. In recent years, Rose Villa became a private school and is now a nursery. The crossroads in front of Rose Villa, where Rectory Lane and Church Chair join Front Street, were originally called the Cross. It was here that the extent of the village ended in the 1600s. Coal wains crossed here, travelling from south to north and onwards to the River Tyne. The building, which now houses a dentist and bank, was originally Cross House Farm. Previously, Lord's Stores occupied the site for many years. Over the road we see the village jeweller and the Halifax Estate Agency in Rectory Court. It was once the morgue for the cottage hospital. Whickham Hall, now a community medical centre, was built on the site of a medieval rectory, destroyed by Scottish marauders in 1640 after the Battle of Newburn. The hall was rebuilt in 1713 and became the new rectory. During the First World War, the Reverend Little had a workshop here, making shell casings. It continued as a rectory until 1922. In 1924, it was converted into the Whickham and District War Memorial Cottage Hospital. In 1984, it became a private school for infants and juniors until 2002, when it was to return to its previous use in providing medical services to the community. The building still displays the arms of Lord Crewe, Bishop of Durham, the mitre being specially angled to face the church. The cottage at the entrance to the medical centre was once the home of the rector's gardener. It became a fashionable bar in the summer of 2003, and in 2004 was converted to an Indian restaurant. On the south side of Front Street is a terrace of small shops. They have served a variety of purposes, from banks to chemists, sweet shop, wool shop and hairdresser. Set behind the shops is Chase Park. The park has been a popular venue for many community activities. Here the round table is having a fundraising event. This old footage shows the bed push contest battling its way to the park. Another well-supported event was the annual summer fair, organised by Whickham Lions Club. This film, made in 1989, shows a typical fair.
Thank you.
There's a clear winner in the boys' events, and the trophy goes for the full 12 months to Felside! Where's the captain? Where's the captain of Felside? You'll have to be you. There you go. Give him a cheer!
To celebrate the new millennium, the churches of the village amalgamated to put on a magnificent celebration production, Time Lord 2000, in our splendid park.
For that wasn't enough for the winter in the spring. Oh. If heaven
This is my body, given for you. Do take this in remembrance of me. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, that you might have forgiveness of sins.
Over me. You stupid fool. Don't you realize if I set you free, they'll say I'm an enemy of Rome? And still you won't speak? Won't you at least plead for your own life?
My spirit.
You say the cloth that covered the Holy of Holies has been torn from top to bottom?
The mill at the high end of the park existed in 1567, when the villagers were ordered to pay for its upkeep. The Scots invaded in 1640, and the millstones were broken, but there is no record of when the mill ceased working. It has now been allowed to fall into disrepair. The shops on the north side of Front Street were converted from houses. The site of the present Barclays Bank was the Crown Garage. Ye Old Lang Jack pub was formerly the Crown Hotel and dates back many years. It was later renamed the Rose and Crown before being renamed Ye Old Lang Jack. Located in the centre of the village is a statue in memory of Lang Jack, whose real name was John English. The statue previously stood outside his cottage in Clockburn, Lonnon. He was a well-known character, reputed to be a man of enormous strength, who was described as the Tyneside Samson. He was a stonemason, and some of his work carried out in 1842 can be seen here, where stone pillars support Butterfly Bridge, which crosses the River Derwent at the lower end of Clockburn, Lonnon. He built his own cottage at the junction of Clockburn, Lonnon and Woodside Lane, just off Fellside Road, but the cottage was destroyed by fire in 1907. Lang Jack died in 1860, 6 years after his statue was erected. In 1977, the statue was moved to its present position by the builders J.T. Bell when the Fellside Park estate was developed. Going west past Lang Jack's monument, we see the biggest change made to Whickham, the building of St Mary's Green 30 years ago. This pleasant pedestrian shopping centre is separated from the traffic by a green, with trees and flower beds allowing shoppers to walk in safety away from the traffic. Set back from the road was Taylor's butcher's shop, with an abattoir to the side. It was taken down carefully and transported to Beamish Museum with the intention of recreating it. Today it is still a pile of stones waiting to be rebuilt. The buildings on the south side were demolished to make way for the extension to the telephone exchange, and those on the north side for part of St Mary's Green and the building of the Gibbside Hotel. The only remaining stone-built shop, now Fifth Element Health Beauty Salon, was once Robert Hill's chemist shop. Completely surrounded by the Gibbside Hotel and right on the pavement is the Spoor Chapel, just known locally as Spoor. This small primitive Methodist chapel was built in the 1870s and commemorates a remarkable local man, the Reverend Joseph Spoor. An extension in keeping with the style of the building was carefully squeezed in between the modern hotel and the existing church only a few years ago. Here was another row of shops, which included offices of a local taxi firm. The block was demolished many years ago, but the taxi rank parking still exists today. Alpine Cottage and a compound for stray animals known as the Pinfold was opposite. It is now a car park. Behind in back row are Whickham sale rooms, opened in 1966. The building was originally built after the First World War as a miners' welfare hall for Axwell Park Colliery. Back on Front Street, we come to the Square, which was developed in 1961, the first major redevelopment in the village. Whickham Front Street is now a bustling shopping centre, and there is little sign of the farm that once stood in the heart of the village, here on the right. Glebe Farm was demolished 40 years ago. Part of the old farm wall remains, and to commemorate the site of the old village pump, parts of the stonework were included in the wall in the 1960s. The first house at the east end of the row is a cottage with an interesting window built on the corner. It was adapted to serve initially as a baker's shop. A little further along is Salisbury House. There is evidence to show the house was built in 1653. It could have been a manor house on the outskirts of the village, which at that time ended at Cross Farm, where the village dental practice stands today. In the 1900s, Salisbury House was often referred to as Fiddler's Hall due to an elderly gentleman playing a violin at an upstairs window. This is the former home of the Swalwell brewer Matthew Taylor. It was taken over in 1925 as a centre for Durham County Council activities, and in 1951 became a residential hostel. The garden behind the Hermitage was originally set out in a willow pattern design, with a lake, pagoda and bridge. Today volunteers are redeveloping this garden to something of its original appearance.
As you can see, this is the lake that the garden was known for. The lake has been lined out with brick and on the bottom concrete flagstones. It was then covered with a thick layer of pitch to waterproof the whole thing. Now these brick pillars supported a wooden bridge which went across that gap. This was what gave the garden its old-fashioned name of the willow pattern.
On the opposite side of the road are a number of attractive old houses. They were probably built in the late 18th century, and several of them are listed buildings. The Bridle Path Public House was formerly the Three Tuns. Further along Back Row, we come to Whickham Social Club, built about 1920. This is probably the first committee of 11 stout men in their best outfits. The bowler-hatted gentleman was probably a deputy or foreman at the colliery, and the cloth-capped gentlemen were the general workers. The social club was one of the most important social facilities in the area, and many men gave their time and effort to serve on the club committee. Many social activities took place in the club, such as leek shows, Easter bonnet competitions and regular dances. Street Community School opened in 1909, when the old parochial school could no longer cope with the increased population. Next to the school entrance, Bert's Barber's shop, known locally as Bertie the Barber of Front Street, opened in 1969. The Armstrong's family barber's business goes back 4 generations to when the first shop was opened in Swalwell in 1879 by Ralph Armstrong. Whickham Community Centre was built in 1910 as a centre for leisure activities for Axwell Park Colliery. When the colliery closed in 1953, the centre was taken over by Durham County Council and later Gateshead Council. It is still in constant use today. At the bottom of Fellside Road stands the West End Wesleyan Chapel, built in 1869. It closed in 1980 and reopened as Whickham Community Church around 1982. At the annual Whickham Flower Show of 1906, held in the rectory grounds, it was reported in a local newspaper that Whickham district enjoys a high reputation for the excellence in floral and vegetable produce, and we finish with a few pictures of the local annual spring and summer flower shows held in 2004.